She takes some questions along the way, but then we'll have a really good Q&A time at the end, hopefully general questions, and then we'll wrap up, and then if there's individual questions, we can talk about those at the end. Couple more.
Watered down, yeah, it's melting. Yeah. See, now I'm afraid to not get it for you, because what are we going to move forward? It's some too expensive. A certain level of energy.
Amanda, we're good to go?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I was like, this is off.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our financial aid night. So glad you're here, and hopefully we'll have some more people coming in as we go. But we're excited to have Ashley Bianchi here, and she's going to present, and I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. But again, we're doing this, our live stream, so that folks from home, if they can't make it in, they can still get the financial aid presentation, get the information. But since you're here, you guys are going to be able to be the ones to ask the questions. So she'll give her presentation. We'll have lots of time at the end for questions and answers. Just as a reminder, restrooms are back there. I imagine we'll go about 45 minutes. It's kind of like what's happened in the past. And then again, we'll have plenty of time for questions. And then at the end, if you have more individual questions, Ashley, myself, And Jimmy Buckley, our other college counselor, will be available to talk more individually. So I'm really excited that Ashley is here with us again. She is an expert in the field, and we're really lucky that she takes time out of her schedule to come down and be with us and to give our parents lots of great information. This is an interesting week for us in the college counseling office. If you have friends who are your own seniors or people in the kind of the thick of the process right now, a lot of decisions have come out in the last couple of weeks. We're going to get a lot more tonight. A lot more tomorrow and over the weekend. April 1st as really the kind of the national notification deadline. Most schools are giving their notifications by at least April 1st for a deposit deadline, so the seniors have to make their choices and deposit by May 1st. So that's kind of where all our seniors are. So many great acceptances out there, a lot of excitement, some disappointments. But then the questions really turn towards the money and really, what investment the student and the family are going to make, and really thinking about fit. We talk a lot about fit here at Xavier and what's going to be the fit for the student, for the family, academic fit, financial fit for 4 years of college. So we do talk with our students a lot about it's not just the first year of college, it's really the 4-year investment in college. And it's great that that Ashley's here too to help us kind of put that into some context and give us some guidance around it. So I'm going to read Ashley's official bio. Ashley is the Director of Financial Aid at Williams College. She joined Williams in August of 2018. After serving as the Director of Financial Aid at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania for 5 years. Ashley has also worked at Rhodes College and the College of Charleston in a financial aid capacity. She is professionally involved at the regional and national levels at the College Board, and she serves on the Executive Council of the Eastern Association of Financial Aid Administrators, as well as various committees from the National Association of Financial Aid Administrators. Ashley received her Bachelor of Science degree in Counselor Education from Mississippi State University and her Master's of Education degree in Higher Education Administration from the University of South Carolina. She's been married for 13 years and has a 9-year-old son, Ward. So, welcome to Ashley. Turning it over.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How you doing? Good. I think this is my official first live stream, so hi, everyone at home. I hope you can hear me okay. Before we get started, I need you to promise me one thing, that you will yell for the Mississippi State Bulldogs this weekend. They are playing in the Sweet 16 for the Women's NCAA Championship out in Portland, Oregon, and we need to win, because if we win both games, my son and I are going to Tampa, Florida. And I live in Western Massachusetts, and it's been very cold. And so if we can get there, then we're going to Tampa next weekend. So please yell for them this weekend. But just a little bit about me. I am a huge sports fan and a big, loyal Mississippi State fan. So I doubt Mississippi State is on anyone's list in the room, but go Bulldogs. So thank you for having me, Laura and Jimmy. I really appreciate being here. This is probably my 5th or 6th time here, and it always feels more and more like home when I come. And used to be a night visit, just getting here and getting back to Easton when I lived there. Lafayette's just about 80 miles away. But now I get to spend the night, which is even better. Williams College, just a little bit about where I am now. Williams College is in Western Massachusetts, which is an easy train ride. I rode down on the train today. And an excellent place, and I'm really honored to represent it. But tonight will be more about general financial aid and sort of really about sort of where your minds are at the moment kicking off this process. I watched while Laura was asking who's who in the room, so we've got some sophomores, a lot of junior families in the room. Did we have any seniors? I don't think so, right? Seniors are already moved past us, which is great. Really just a mix, it seems like, of people who've done this before and then folks who this is their first time. I am a first-generation college student myself, so my parents were sitting in those shoes where they didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing, and we were all kind of trying to figure it out together. Turned out great for me, so I know it will for you as well. And again, fit is super important in this process. So tonight we're just going to go over some basics, get you started, get the lingo correct, get you sort of a bit more educated, like me in the field at every college you're going to apply to. They're going to be able to walk you through this process. Okay? So disarmed and ready to go, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about several types of financial aid tonight. Scholarships and grants is probably the one that you're most anxious to hear about. How do I get free money, right? But we're also going to talk about loans and student employment as well. And then we're going to talk about the dreaded how much do I have to pay question, right? So we're going to talk about sort of what's going to come out of your family contribution to go to college. And I can say with pretty good confidence that most of you will pay something to go to college. So we'll just sort of set that as the baseline, and then that something will vary from seat to seat, right? So that's kind of why we're here. So let's start with the most popular topic. Let's start with scholarships and grants. Scholarships and grants are the free money. This is money that colleges give in order to influence your enrollment. There are going to be different types of this. That colleges will give to students. A lot of times this is thought of as like reward money, right? Worked so hard in high school. Oftentimes this is pegged to perhaps a test score or be pegged to a student's It also has some really tangible effects if your student has a particular talent, like an athletic talent or a artistic talent of any sort. So those are the types of things. This is money. This is probably the most confusing of the money because it varies so much from school to school. A lot of times it's a bit not logical from school to school. Oftentimes this is, again, based on who the student is as a person. A student from New York City might be very, very attractive. From New York City that's going to a college in Connecticut, there's a lot of those, right? So you think about that. So thinking about how schools spend their money. What they're representing as well. I would say here, I'm going to say this several times tonight, but deadlines are really, really important in this process. Probably more so than you have experienced thus far in life, certainly that your students have. Might not be a lot more deadlines ahead of you that are more important than this. Keeping in mind if application deadlines, timeline, keeping in mind that those college counseling staff will help, of course, but as a parent, I oftentimes say this might be a good time for parents to start. We're always telling you to back off, right? We're always telling you, let the student do the work. The student's the driver of this process. All right, so the other type of quote-unquote free money, perhaps a little more straightforward for some of you than others. That colleges will give to try to equal the playing field, right? So colleges spend, again, most of the time their own money in order to make education affordable. So a family who makes $50,000 a year backs. So in order to comfortable place where need-based is. And need-based is really about numbers, and oftentimes about you as about your family's ability to pay. So circumstance, how they are, how you are doing financially, both past, present, and future. So your past is sort of your past earnings, current earnings, what you might be capable of, say, borrowing or financing in the long term. So that's sort of thinking about that as oftentimes my colleagues will say a three-legged stool, right? So you think about what you can do, what you can pay from savings, what you can pay from current income, and then what you can pay from future income or borrowing. So that's a bit of a three-legged stool. So that's how we do that. Again, most oftentimes that nationally, most money comes from institutions, but you hear a lot about state and federal money oftentimes because there are some places where state and federal money really make a big difference. And so we're going to talk about the forms that I mentioned here in a moment, so I won't go into detail, but again, we're talking merit-based aid, need-based aid. So we got the free money down for a moment. Terrific. Let's move on to not so free money. Okay, sure. It's probably, well, yeah, we should have turned this one.
When you say forms, you mean CSS?
That's correct. Yes, absolutely. All right, so that's better, huh? Okay, good. I'm going to make sure it stays up here. All right, so student loans. So student loans, I think, get a really bad rep in sort of the financing world. And it is because there are some folks out there who are bad actors, right? Who really have abused the student loan system, who have perhaps borrowed at more than they should have, or at a capacity or a program in which they should not have done. And perhaps they are now in a place where their education, their debt has exceeded their education, right? And so I think oftentimes we focus on those situations, and no doubt there are students out there who are borrowing lots and lots of money to go to college. I will say the national data from the College Board tells us, though, that most people borrow within the federal limits. And what that means is a federal student loan, which is that first line up there, has annual limits on it. The first year a student can borrow $5,500, the second year $6,500, and the third and fourth year $7,500. And if students borrow that, then they say about 88% of students follow that path or less borrowing. And so those students, I think, no matter what your career trajectory is, that's a doable amount of financial aid to borrow, right? That, again, nationally speaking. And so what happens is these outlier cases are when students go beyond that maximum for some reason, whether that school was not in the family's price range to begin with, whether the parent couldn't contribute their portion and so the student is borrowing on behalf of the parent, those sorts of things. That's typically when these major student loan crisis type things happen. So I kind of want to just set that up as a way to say, if borrowing is a part of your financing plan, it was a part of my financing plan for me and my family, it's okay, and don't be scared of that, but be aware of how that works over the course of 10, 20, or 30 years, depending on how much you borrow and what your repayment plan is. So that's the student loan piece. You see the interest rate there. That is an annualized interest rate is for the life of the loan. It goes up and down a little bit each year based on how the Federal Reserve tags the interest rate. But it's been hovering between 3 and 5% for about 10 to 15 years now. The Parent Plus loan is another, again, financing option. It's an option in the parent's name instead of the student's. This is if your contribution just feels too steep for you based on your savings and your current income. Remember what the third leg of the stool is future income. So you're borrowing based on what you know you're going to be able to earn over the course of a number of years. You see the interest rate there as well. That one is credit-based, where the student loan is not. The student gets it regardless of their credit history or lack thereof. Parents, you do have to have a little bit of credit. You may have seen recently in the news, the Trump administration is looking at sort of how the credit works for this parent loan process. So that could be changing. We don't know. But that could be changing. But right now, it's really looking at your payment history. It doesn't look at debt to income ratio very much at all. So it's based on your payment history, and if you're behind in your bills. Right, absolutely. I'm going there next. So Parent Plus you can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus the financial aid that you give. So let's say your cost of attendance is $20,000, you get $10,000 in financial aid. You can borrow the $10,000 left to pay the contribution. So you can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus the financial aid that you are eligible to borrow. Yes. That does include room and board, yes. So you can borrow up to full cost of attendance, which cost of attendance, just for your sort of knowledge in the back of your head, when we talk about cost of attendance, we talk about full cost of attendance, which includes tuition, fees, room, board, books, and then sort of an estimate for personal miscellaneous and travel, which is again, each school is going to determine what that is.
How does it work if you use it, you move off campus? Does it have to be that you have to move on campus in order to move forward?
The question is about do you have to live on campus in order for this financing plan to work? And no, each financial aid office is permitted, and they do allow. Basically, we will give you financial aid for the same amount that you would be paying for a double room on campus. So no matter what your rent is off campus, we will give financial aid for a double room on campus. Sometimes that works to your benefit, where rent is cheaper than what's on campus. Sometimes that works to your detriment, where the private market is such that where rent is more expensive than what's on campus. All right, and then the third type of loan that I'm going to mention is really what I would call a last resort loan, which is a private or alternative loan. This is the type of loan that folks are really getting in trouble with. These are the stories you see in the news often, are these private or alternative loans. These are loans in students' names. Most of the time they have to have a co-signer. And these are loans where either the maximum amount for the direct loan doesn't meet the student's need, or when the parents can't or won't borrow. So again, I look at these as last resort loans because they are variable interest rate loans, just as if you're going to the bank. They have very few forgiveness policies, as do the federal. The federal loans have forgiveness policies. These do not. So they're very much more like a private equity sort of loan. The positive side of this is if you have really good credit and you have a co-signer who has really good credit, you can get a better interest rate here. The detriment side is that there's not a lot of regulation on maximums or things. So, if you are a smart consumer and you sort of know that market well, go for it. Not going to say no. That is just where folks get in trouble. It's sort of like having an open line of credit, and it just gets folks in trouble sometimes. So that's sort of my caution there. Dinner table conversation, not really, but those two questions at the bottom are really just food for thought for you and your family, sort of as you're making this journey, is, are you a good investment? So we're talking about students here, right? I think because you have invested so much to this point, I think the answer is yes for all of you. But then how much is too much, right? So how much are you comfortable as a family taking on in that sort of 3-tier financing plan: savings, current income, and future through borrowing. Okay? All right, so that's the loan piece. I'm going to move along to my favorite, which is student employment. For those of you who went to college, who had a job when they were in college to help pay for college? Yep, me too. So fun, right? I think folks have very different, sort of experiences in college, especially now that we're sort of going from generation 2 to 3 maybe, or something like that. It is often not possible anymore for a student to quote-unquote work their way through college. That's one of those misnomers, I believe. I think maybe a generation or 2 generations ago that was possible when costs were a little bit more efficient. But now, what I think of as student employment, or when students work during college, I think of it being twofold. I think of it being terrific life experience, first and foremost. They're having to get up, they're having to be accountable. For you as parents, it's a terrific way for you to have another adult with their eyes on your student, right? So there is someone out there that's expecting your student to come to work. They're expecting your student to look reasonably put together when they come to work. And then when they aren't in either of those situations, there's someone saying, that looks weird. We have student workers in our office, and I can tell when midterms are coming because they start showing up in pajamas about a week ahead. And then they start looking a little more disheveled every day. And then I say to them, stop, go home, take a nap during your shift that you should be here, take a shower, get real clothes on, and then study some more, right? So that's sort of our, so you can tell, like you start to like sacrifice other things in order to get your work done, obviously. And so I think that's a huge benefit. So that's benefit number 1 in my mind. Has nothing to do with finances, but it's a benefit for students to, I think, work on campus, to connect to campus, to have that sort of other adult person looking out for them. And then, of course, there's the financial benefit, which I think is a really terrific way for a student to contribute to their education. That contribution may be to cover books. It may be to cover personal expenses. It may be to cover the bus or the train ticket home a couple of times a semester. You all as a family decide what that money is for. But it is a great way, in my opinion, to sort of have the student be responsible for something but not carry the full burden of a cost of attendance on their shoulders. The expectation is that students are typically working between 7 and 10 hours a week. Most of the time they're making minimum wage. They must make at least minimum wage, but sometimes they make a little bit over. And what I've just recently learned, moving from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts, minimum wage varies from state to state. I lived in the South, and then I moved, to the North, and both states happen to have had minimum wage as the federal minimum. I think New York has a higher than federal minimum. Pennsylvania we're going to be at $15 in like 2 years. It's crazy. So, which is great. I'm for that, but what I'm saying is it can be very lucrative now. I think that it can be more than twice what the federal minimum wage is almost. And so you think about sort of how a student can contribute. It's a really good conversation. So again, number of hours per week, that's a consideration. I think national data tells us that somewhere between about 7 and 12 hours is about when a student has the right level of engagement. Less than, they may not really be invested in the job. More than, they might be doing more work than they are studying, right? So that's sort of the balance there. Again, that's kind of a national statistic. And then I think one thing to know is that the student's paycheck is going to them. By law, we can't send that to you as a parent. We can't credit that to their student bill. So that has to be a paycheck. Just like I get paid every 2 weeks by Williams, our students also get paid every 2 weeks by Williams. So this in the same manner. And again, that's set up by law. And so what that means is you have to be cognizant that if that's going into the student's bank account, you might never see that. The biggest secret I feel like I pulled on my parents was I sold my books back after every semester. My parents, again, they didn't go to college. They didn't know you could sell your books back. So I got all this pocket money at the end of every semester. I never told them about it until like probably 5 years ago, and they were like, for real? They couldn't believe it. So think about those little things. If you're not sort of know exactly what's happening at the college, know that students are working and they're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, and that can take into consideration what you are contributing to their education. Right, so the question is, why is it called work study? It's sort of I think maybe a pejorative term or something, as kind of a dated term at this point. But the actual name work study comes from the amount of federal funding that a school gets in order to employ students. So most institutions get a certain cut from the federal government in order to hire students. And students who qualify for that particular pot of funding actually get funded at 75% the government and 25% for the college. So for every dollar that the student makes, 75% is being paid by federal dollars, 25% by institutional dollars. So I think it is, again, kind of I like to call it student employment because it sort of broadens the scope of it. I also don't like for students to think that they can just sit and study. I don't think that's that sometimes happens, that there are jobs that happens, but the majority of jobs do have some sort of duty, so the work comes before the study. And so I think it's a more broad term to use student employment. So I try to use that, but federal work study, that actual name there is the federal portion of what colleges pay. Right, so the question is there a difference in getting a job in college? Not really. So any kind of on-campus job, most colleges will just sort of behind the scenes switch the money from federal to campus, and so to make that 75-25 work. A student's not going to get two paychecks, one from the federal government and one but I think what the benefit of federal work study specifically is that colleges must spend that money. So students who are awarded federal work study have a higher chance of getting a job and earning that full amount than perhaps a student who's not that doesn't qualify for that, may have a lower priority for hiring. And if there is a scarcity of jobs from campus to campus, the federal students would be guaranteed to earn more than the non-federal students. But your question, I think, brings up a point about, well, why not just go off campus and get a job at Starbucks or whatever? And that certainly is what some students choose to do. I will say that most of the time, hours are more flexible on campus. Hours are also, supervisors are also educators on campus. So there's more about sort of that moment where I tell a student, go home, take a shower, take a nap. That's really not going to happen by your manager at Starbucks sometimes, where they need you to be standing at the counter, for your 5-hour shift. So I oftentimes encourage students to look at the on-campus options first, at least, see if they meet their needs, so that students do have that connection to campus rather than feeling more like a commuter where you're just going to class and then leaving campus to have your job and the rest of your things. I will say one thing. I will take your questions 1 second. I will say one thing about federal work study specifically. So again, all students can work on campus, and a lot of colleges will limit this based on their ability to pay students, right? So sometimes colleges will say only if you were awarded work study can you work on campus. Some colleges will say, oh no, whoever wants to works on campus, tutor in every subject that's part of this off-campus work study, where students are being paid to go off-campus and mentor children. There's all kinds of opportunities depending on the college, depending on the location of the college, those sorts of things. So it's a really good way, and again, I always say it here because your students are so used to giving that service, and it's not a bad idea to get paid for it, right? So that's terrific. Yeah, it's a good one. All right, so I know there's a hand, and I know we're at sort of a stopping point. So I'm going to put these up so you can read them, but I will answer some questions. Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. Go ahead and do next. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right. So the comment was just about the benefit of being on campus versus off campus. Yes. So if you have an off campus job, your job might be year round. It might not coincide with breaks. The supervisor might not be. So yes. So when students are not in session, we don't expect them to work. There are some times where we're on spring break right now. We have about 300 students on campus, and some of those are working just because of their choice, but that's certainly not an expectation. That's correct. Yes, sir. Oh, I may have misspoken. No, the hourly the hourly rate is I'm sorry, it's the hourly rate and the number of hours paid is how much you're going to earn. So what I mean by that is it's multiplication. Exactly. Yeah. What I mean by that is if you work 5 hours at minimum wage, let's say 5 hours times $10 an hour, you're going to get $50. But 1 week you only work 1 hour, you're only going to get 10 hours. You're not going to get that 50 even though you were budgeted for that. That's what I meant by that. I'm sorry if it was confusing. Yes. So so the question is, can any student apply for an on-campus job? That is going to be specific to the institution. This is my 4th institution, and we've always had, every institution I've been a part of, both public and private, have always had opportunities for students who are not qualified for the federal work study. So I would say the majority of campuses will have jobs for non-eligible federal work study students. But I would say the difference is most oftentimes the jobs will be prioritized for federal students to earn first. And so there may be a delay in the student getting a job. It may not be the student's first choice job, something like that. But I have not been at a campus, and again, I only represent 4, but I have not been at a campus where a student who really wanted to work couldn't work. It might have not been that student's first choice of a job. They may have had to wait until mid-October to get that job, something like that. But a lot of colleges depend on the students to have a labor force, right? And so if you think about that, like there are lots and lots of jobs on our campuses that are only done by students. And so if you think about, say, the libraries, say the dining services folks, say, the athletics monitors, all of those sorts of things oftentimes are done by students. And so there are a wide range of jobs that students can have. Some have more of a work component, some have more of a study component, and then there's those that kind of merge the two. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. So for merit-based scholarships, I'm just going to grab my coffee. Merit-based scholarships really are going to vary from institution to institution. And again, I know you guys are just starting this process, but if merit-based aid is a really important part of your college search for your family, you need to articulate that to your college counselor very early on, and then you need to sort of start to educate yourself about which schools have merit. How are they giving the merit? Is it just, like you said, it comes to you when your student is accepted? Is there a separate application process? Is there an interview day for it? Those sorts of things. So it's going to vary really widely. I would say, I would say the large majority, it oftentimes just comes as part of your admit packet. And what that means is it's all based on your student's academic record, what they put into their common application or their application itself, those sorts of things. So that's been, I would say the majority of them. But there are niche programs that, will ask you to interview. And if you choose not to interview, or if your student misses that email or phone call, they do more than just one, but if they have not been responsive to the college when we've asked you to come and interview, you're not going to get a scholarship. So it is kind of incumbent upon families to sort of understand when you start to narrow the list down, who offers merit scholarships, how much are they, how do you get them, when are you notified about them, all of those sorts of things. I'll take her in the back and then I'll come back to you. Yes. Federal work study, right. So I'm going to dive into applications next. So applications will be through the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So we're going to dive into those next. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so you're right. So the question is, for schools who have athletic programs but don't have athletic scholarships to support them, how does that work as far as, is there any incentive? So I would say the largest incentive is on the admission side, right? And so, for a Division III school who doesn't have athletic scholarships, you may have read something recently about a scandal that is kind of bubbling through the world and had a lot to do with athletes and the preference that admissions gives for athletes, right? We won't debate that tonight. But what I will say is the most influential part of the whole process is probably on the admission side, right? So if a coach is supporting a student and they put their support behind a student, that is really where the benefit of athletics lives in the Division III world. There could be an arrangement at a specific college where, all of the wrestling team lives their senior year at a house on blah 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 street. Students are still paying for that. There's no financial incentive behind that. So I can tell you with confidence that no one in Division III is giving any dollars to athletes because they are athletes. They're not permitted to do that. I can't, of course, say with confidence that no one's doing it, but they are not permitted to do that. So there is no financial incentive for a student athletes. Now, there may be a leadership scholarship associated because your student demonstrated leadership while on the blank court, whatever that is. So that might be an associated leadership scholarship, but that student's going to get that scholarship whether they play the sport or not. That's the big difference. All right, we're going to move on. I just want you to sort of, these are not right or wrong answers, so I'm not going to answer those for you, but these are just questions that you want to sort of note, and again, they're going to be in your handout, so if you haven't jotted them down. These are just ones that when you start to visit colleges, think about colleges, talk to colleges when they come for school visits here, these are the sorts of questions that you might want to dig in. They're going to tell you a lot. It's going to sound very similar from school to school. This is really where you get the nitty-gritty answers, okay? All right, let's get to the application part. I'm going to start with the net price calculator because that's really the first moment that you touch the application. So the net price calculator is something perfect for sophomores and juniors to do. So where you're sitting right today is the net price calculator. You can do that for as many institutions as you'd like. It is a federally mandated thing out on each person's website. So I can assure you that it's going to be on whatever college that your student is talking about at the dinner table. They're going to have a net price calculator. And you can go out and start to shop around. This is more of sort of a shop around sort of tool. And it takes, there are some that are quick calculators that take 2.5 minutes, and there's some that take about 20 minutes. So you should probably engage your student to say, what's your level of interest and how much time am I going to spend on blank college versus blank college. So you can sort of think about that. But what I would tell you is just a couple of quick tips. A, garbage in, garbage out. If you somehow think your income's going to divide in half in the next 12 months, then if you're going to put that information in, unless your income actually divides in half, then that's not going to be an accurate estimate, right? So put your actual estimates in. You're probably all doing your taxes about right now, right? So 2018 taxes, that's what the junior class is going to use for their financial aid application. So you actually have the tools in hand at the moment to know about what your financial aid package is going to be. Compare them, right? So maybe you want to do, you've heard 3 schools, and you want to compare what the school is telling you that you're going to get. That's a great way to start that conversation. Are they accurate? It totally depends. Totally depends. It is to the students' it is to the institution's benefit to be as accurate as possible. Remember, this is really a marketing tool for schools, and so we don't want to tell you something that completely turns you off, and then you don't don't follow through with an application or something like that. So it's to the school's benefit to be accurate. It's difficult for some schools to get it right because they may have that merit scholarship. They may have, you may have a very specific financial situation that confuses the calculator. If you and your spouse are living apart or are no longer married, that sometimes confuses the calculator. So there are some specific situations where it's hard to get it accurate, but I would say that by and large, they're accurate. I will give you one tip, and that is once you do the net price calculator, don't shut down your computer and be like, oh, can't do that. Print out the results, all of the inputs of the results, and then have a conversation with the college and say, I put all my information in, and it looks really good or it looks really bad, and can you talk me through that? That is what we're here to do. The time in which you want to do that is not now, though. It is late summer, early fall, because right now we're trying to enroll the senior class. So if you call me up tomorrow and say, I want to talk about net price calculator, I will say, I am sorry, let's reschedule this in July, right? Because that is not a time in which I can sit down with a prospective family. But remember, you don't have to apply until the earliest, October, November, that sort of thing. So you have time. So late summer, early fall is when I would recommend that you pull out your net price calculators that you've already done. You brush off your 2018 tax returns at that point, and you say, okay, let's call some colleges, and let's talk through the net price calculator before we decide whether we want to apply or not. Okay? All right, long-awaited applications. Most common one is the FAFSA. Everyone heard of the FAFSA, whether it's through an article or something online? Free application for federal student aid. It's free. Great. It is available in October of 2000. Weird. I updated that on the train. It didn't save. Sorry. Just fast forward your mind for a year, please. So the 1920, which is the current year, but for 2021, which is the junior classes, it's going to be available on October 1, 2019. Okay, so a year from what it says there. I apologize for that. So what that means is you can begin to apply for financial aid in October of your student's senior year. Again, you're going to be using 2-year-old data, so you're going to be using data that you're doing right now. It's all going to be done online at the FAFSA website, and a student is going to have a username, so each student has a unique username, and then a parent needs to have a username, just one parent if it's in a 2-parent household. And parents, if you've had an older sibling, you can use that same username again for your so this is all for signatures. Do you have a question? Yes. Yes. Typically, the earliest deadlines are early decision is November 1st, November 15th, somewhere in that range. Yes. Yeah, so yes, you will get a financial aid decision with your early decision application because you can apply early. Right. So you have a month, 6 weeks, somewhere in that range. I promise you'll get it done in a month. I promise. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yes, go ahead. Yes, so I'm grounding you in the dates for junior class, but you just fast forward your mind 365 days. So you're going to be, so as a parent as a sophomore, you're going to be using 2019 taxes, and you're going to be doing it in October of 2020. Thank you. Gosh. Yeah, it does get confusing. You're right. Yep, so just fast forward. And again, I did update this on the train, so I apologize. How many years of tax returns? That's a great question. So for FAFSA, you're only going to need 1 year. So it's a snapshot, and it's 2-year-old data. So it's going to be, it's really just a 1-year thing. I will lead into the next part, which is the CSS profile. And the CSS profile, we look at 3 years. So just pause your question, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So for the FAFSA, I'm going to get through this because I know we're short on time, and I want to make sure that we at least have this information in front of us. So I'm going to do the applications, and then I'm going to take questions, okay? So for FAFSA, here is the data that you're going to be inputting, and here's the data that is applicable for FAFSA. So you'll see the usual suspects: taxable income, not taxable income, your taxes, what you pay both the federal and state. Asset information, FAFSA does not include your primary home as an asset, so that is not a part of the calculation. Family size, so how many people live in your household, how many of those go to college. It only includes college enrollees that are dependents of parents, so the parent themselves is not a college enrollee in this situation. And then there's a couple of protections, so income protection and employment expenses if both of your parents are working. So those are, again, pretty simple, right? So this is, it is a skip logic sort of form, so it doesn't ask you questions that shouldn't apply to you. I don't want to simplify it and say that it's not hard, because it sometimes is, but they've to college, you have 3 people in the household, right? When you do your student's FAFSA, when you do your son's FAFSA, you're going to have 3 people in the household, 1 in college. When you do your FAFSA, you're going to have 3 people in the household, 2 in college. Does that make sense? Okay, terrific. Yes. 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 Got it. Should have given you the mic, yes. So the question and answer is, who fills out the FAFSA if you are a parent who doesn't have both parents in the same household? Parents are divorced, no longer living together. The primary parent that spends more than 50% of the time with the student is the filler-outer of this form. Right? So this is what we call the custodial parent. Even if you split custody 50% and there's one more night at one house than the other, that's who you are. Students really get a choice here. So students decide who is my custodial parent. Maybe it's exactly 50-50. That is even more challenging for students, because then they have to decide, all right, who do I like more? No, not really. But you sort of, students really have that choice to say, this is my custodial parent, this is my non-custodial parent. That's correct. That's correct. So marital status on here, we will ask for your marital status as of the day you complete the application and when that marital status was last updated. So, you would say divorced March 2014. That would be what you would say. And then as long as your verification worksheet matches your application, no questions asked. Yes. Right. If you live in the same household, so the question is, what about unmarried parents living in the same household? If you live in the same household, you're a household, period. So who it doesn't matter who has a tax return and what status. If you live in the same household, you are a household together. This is for people who don't live in the same household. All right, I promise I'm going to move. All right, the secondary application. So we've talked about the FAFSA. The FAFSA is by far the most common. You may never have to do this application in your life, but I'll tell you who to pay attention and who can check your phone to see what time it is. So the people who need to pay attention here are people who are applying to private institutions, who are typically selective or very selective, who have a lot of institutional money to give away. That is, and then there's a couple of Midwestern publics who do it for graduate programs and things. But typically speaking, if this sounds like a college that you've been hearing about around the dinner table, you want to pay attention here. The CSS profile, it is done. College Scholarship Service is the abbreviation. It is a product of the College Board. It is a proprietary product of the College Board, so you must pay for it, whereas the FAFSA was free. It is $25 for the first application, $16 for any additional. So if you're applying to 8 schools and all 8 require the CSS profile, it'll be pretty pricey for you. Good news is if you qualify for free reduced lunch, or if you got an SAT fee waiver, you also automatically get a CSS profile fee waiver. So if costs are an issue, that is something to sort of mitigate that. Again, another online form. It's going to ask a lot of the same information that the FAFSA did, and you're going to be like, why are they asking for this twice? I'll tell you in just a minute what else that the CSS profile gives us that the FAFSA does not. I will skip the bottom one because we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Again, so it looks at all of the federal factors that we just talked about. Remember, taxable income, non-taxable income. what you pay in taxes, your assets, those sorts of things. The additional thing that it looks at, going back to your question, ma'am, it looks at 3 years of income. So again, setting in the junior class, it's going to look, your quote unquote base year is going to be 18. Then we're going to look at 19, and then we're going to ask you to estimate for 20. So it does sort of look at, so the base year in this case is prior year. Prior year is the next year, and then expected is coming. So it helps for families who really have uneven income. Maybe you have a business, maybe you have bonuses that come here and there. It helps to sort of smooth that out. As I said before, the FAFSA does not look at home equity if you own a home. It does on the CSS profile. So we want to know what your primary home is worth and how much do you owe on it. And so the difference of that, of course, is equity. We look at medical expenses. Medical expenses have been exorbitant lately, and we have seen more and more people reporting medical expenses on your taxes and then additional medical expenses that we can take into account. That's an important one. Business loss and depreciation. So there are lots of tax laws that allow business owners to reduce their tax liability. And that is a completely legal thing to do. On the FAFSA side, you only report really net income, so you would just report what you report as income from a business. On the CSS profile, you're going to report. We're going to give you all the schedules and things like that for your tax return. So we're going to actually see what your cash flow was. So what your business is worth, what the cost of goods were, what the net profit is, those sorts of things. So we're going to ask for that. And then finally, non-custodial. So to your question, the FAFSA only is concerned with the custodial household, so anyone who lives in that household, including parents, step-parents, unmarried parents living together, all those sorts of things. CSS profile is a little different. It's going to ask you on the front end, who's in your life? You have a mom, you have a dad, you might have a stepmom, you might have a stepdad, you may have 2 moms, 2 dads, anything like that. It's going to ask you pretty specific questions about who they are, and then it's going to determine who it wants information from. So it's going to ask for both custodial and non-custodial household information. It's going to ask for income, asset information from really all parents, and then institutions get to choose who they use. So for instance, at Williams, we only use the biological parent. So we exclude any sort of step-parent information. Where I used to work at Rhodes, we include all 4 parents if there are 4 parents in this situation. So it depends upon school. But the CSS profile allows us to capture who the student is sort of connected to from an adult standpoint. Okay? All right. So this is sort of the last slide about the formula. So basically, you've done your CSS profile. You've done your FAFSA if you needed to do both of those. You get to a point where we talked earlier about cost, right? Cost of attendance is tuition fees, room, board, books, miscellaneous personal, and travel, right? So those are all of the components. Then, as the gentleman said earlier, math. You subtract out the expected family contribution from that, which is what the output of these forms are. And then that really gives you what your demonstrated need is. For those of you who don't like word problems, who like visual things better, let's pretend that there's a cost of attendance of $20,000, right? So you have a cost. The institution all in is $20,000. It's a mythical world that we live in. And your expected family contribution is 10, right? So your demonstrated need, so on the left is what I've just said, on the right is the actual word problem. So cost of attendance minus expected family contribution, your demonstrated need as a family is $10,000, excuse me. So what might an aid package look like? Let's fast forward to, a year or 2 or 3 out. What does an aid package look like? So in this particular case, you would have a $5,000 scholarship or grant. You would have a $2,000 work study award and a $3,000 loan. Just a little quick math quiz. Do those 3 awards add up to meeting a student's need, a demonstrated need? I hear yes. Excellent. Excellent. It does. That means I did my math correctly. But I just illustrate that to show you that a family, that a school can say, we meet demonstrated financial need for all financial aid applicants, which a lot of schools say that. And so I'm demonstrating this to say it doesn't all have to be in scholarship and grant for that statement to be true. So I'm just illustrating that they're meeting need in this particular case with work study and with loan. The family does still have to pay that $10,000. Demonstrated need does not mean that you don't have to pay anything, right? So the family still has to pay the $10,000. The college is helping with the other $10,000. But yeah, the question is, the work study means so the student has an opportunity to work. If the student doesn't get a job because they didn't like the jobs that were available, or if, I think for the most part, a student who would be in this case, who would be awarded, the school does their very best to find the student a job. But if your student oversleeps for 5 days a week and doesn't get there, then that money is not guaranteed. The guarantee is for an opportunity to earn the $2,000. Yes, you're welcome. I know that's what you meant. I just wanted to make sure that that's a clear delineation that's not guaranteed money. That's great. So we're going back to the loan piece. Loans are a part of the financial aid package. Subsidized means the government is subsidizing the interest. So when we go back to the loan portion of the presentation, remember there was an interest rate there of I think 5% or so. That means the interest is not going to accrue while the student is in school. So that's what subsidized means. And it's a federal loan. So it's not up to this institution. It is up to the federal government. And it's based on the student completing the FAFSA correctly to get that subsidized loan. So I'm trying to connect the dots at this point. Yep. Yes. That's a great question. No. So the question is the expected family contribution, can scholarships offset that? I'm assuming you're going to say like an outside scholarship, right? Or something like that, right? So say you get a scholarship from the Rotary, right? That does not offset your expected family contribution. What it can offset, though, and this is helpful for families, it can offset the work study or the student loan, so that the student doesn't have to borrow, they can use their scholarship instead. But that's a really confusing moment for students, and I imagine the seniors who are your students' peers are working through that right now, because that is a moment of sort of confusion of why I did all this work for an outside scholarship if it's not going to help pay for college. It does. It just typically reduces what we call self-help, which is the work study and the subsidized loan piece. Is there anything that offsets the expected family contribution? No. A parent loan would offset the expected family contribution, an alternative loan, or a payment plan, or actual cash. Those are really the 4 ways to have an offset of the expected family contribution. Yep. I never mention it, and I'll always count on you to say it, because there's lots of people who ask that question. Where does 529 come in? 529 can offset that expected family contribution, because a 529 plan is going to be seen as a parent payment for a student. So a 529 plan is part of the savings, which again makes up the savings, current income, and future borrowing. That is the saving piece. So it can offset your expected family contribution. Also a great question. Does it count against you in the process? It is an asset, right? So a 529 plan is an asset. Most oftentimes 529s are set up by parents' names with students as beneficiaries. That means the asset is assessed at the lowest rate, which is going to be a maximum of 5%, somewhere between 3 and 5%. So 3 to 5% of your value in the 529 plan will be assessed each year. So that will affect you slightly in the needs analysis process, but I would say in the same way that your personal rainy day fund would, right? So you don't want to not save for a rainy day just because the college is going to assess that. But I'm glad you brought it up, because it does sort of address his question as well, which is how to offset that expected family contribution, which 529 is a great way to think about that. Yes. So the question is, do you do the FAFSA each year? Absolutely. If you qualify for any sort of need-based financial aid, you're going to want to do the FAFSA and or the CSS profile each year to get that need-based financial aid. If it's just merit aid that you end up getting, most oftentimes you don't have to do that from year to year. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Right. So the question is that expected family contribution that you get as a starting point, is that a 1 year? And it is a 1 year, not a 4 year. And so that really, I know it comes back to people, it knocks them in the chest, right? That's why, again, start early with the net price calculator, start to talk to the colleges, let them help you understand how we're coming up with that. It is not a perfect formula. I am not one of those like nerdy folks who says that, that the needs analysis is perfect by any stretch. In your case, in New York City, oftentimes if you're just doing the FAFSA, it is not going to take into account cost of living, and it's not going to take into account state taxes. I promise you on the CSS profile it does. And may not in a full way, but we adjust by hand. Every student from New York, we adjust their city and local, so their what we call local tax, which is city and state. We adjust by hand. We cap home equity if you have a home, because we know that equity is so, like that your value it could be very high based on what you paid for it if you had it a long time ago. So I can tell you colleges are hearing you. New York, California, like those are places where families are just really saying this is not affordable. So we're trying to make small methodological changes to help with that. But you're right, it is very different to live in New York City than to live in Manhattan, Kansas, right? Like, it's a very different world, and your income just does not go as far. Know that you're going to have handouts to sort of walk you back through the process that we just talked about, a couple of other things to kind of prep you for the fall. And then, again, your college counseling stuff is just terrific here. So just know that you sort of have someone to hold your hand through this. But I'll take more questions. Yeah. The CSS, oh, that's a great question. I didn't say that. So there's a list. So if you just Google CSS profile schools, you will find a list through the College Board has a list, and it's about 250, 300 schools that require this. So of the 4,000 higher ed institutions out there, it's a pretty small portion. I will say some examples just right here in our, in our sort of backyard. Columbia requires that. Fordham requires that. More common ones that NYU will require it. So again, just right in your backyard, those are some schools that do require it. The SUNYs and the CUNYs do not. So it's sort of that's sort of, if you kind of put your frame around that those are kinds of the differences type schools. But a quick Google search will give you a list of every school that does. And then, of course, each website, once you're starting to narrow down colleges, each website will be clear delineation of what's required for financial aid. And so you'll be able to see it there too. Oh, that's correct. Right. So if you plan to take a different standardized test like the ACT instead of the SAT, it's not required. It makes the process just slightly easier if you've already registered for the SAT, because the College Board has your data at that point. But no, there is no there's no difference. I mean, there's no tie from that you must do the SAT to get to the CSS. Sorry if I confused you there. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So what's the student expected to do with their work-study money? So I am actually learning something relatively new at my new institution that I've just been at a few months. But I will say most of the time it is expected to be pocket money, right? So it is expected to be what is covered by non-billed expenses, which again are books, miscellaneous, travel, and personal expenses, right? And so typically those add up to the amount of the work study, so between $2,000 and $3,000, right? And so typically you don't have to turn money over to your bill. What I'm learning though is there are some institutions, Williams is one of them, where their financial aid package is so generous that the amount of work study actually converts to a term bill because our costs are so low. And the reason that is because we don't charge for books for financial aid students. So we have basically an extra $1,000 in every grant. So you don't charge for books, so their personal miscellaneous amounts are smaller. So it actually sometimes... So how we do it at Williams, just to give you an example, is we have $1,800 for personal expenses, and basically if a student who are living in New York City, they have $200 for travel, right? So that's $2,000. So your personal miscellaneous and travel is $2,000, but our work study award is $2,700 because our minimum wage is higher. So in that particular case, $700 of the $2,700 that a student would earn goes back to their bill because those were their only non-billed expenses. So it kind of depends on the institution, but I just kind of want to give you an example of how you might expect part of it to go back to the term bill. But I would say in most cases, the work study money is going to go to offset the non-billed expenses. Yes. That's okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. So the question is, okay, you've gotten to the point where you have, you know what the college is going to give you, you know how that's going to offset your parent, you know how that's going to offset the cost, you know what your parent contribution is, and that is just not what you can do from your past, right, from your savings and from your current income. What are your options to borrow? So your parent loan, that is what I always point to first, is a parent loan. That is a federally guaranteed student loan. The life of the loan is fixed. The interest rate of the life of the loan is fixed, and it's repayment over 10 years. So that would be option one, would be a parent loan. Again, that is credit-based, and right now that credit is just based on if you have more than, I believe, 90-day back bills. So that's really the only time we see parents getting denied those loans. And so that would be option one. Option two would be that alternative loan that we talked about. So that a loan in the student's name with typically a parent as a co-signer. And that is if for some reason in your financial world you don't want to add debt to your personal portfolio. The only time that debt would show up on your credit was if the student themselves didn't pay the loan, then the co-signer is then responsible. So those are the two main options for borrowing. Beyond that, I will say a couple of things. The payment plan is, most schools have a payment plan option. So you aren't expected to pay the full amount due at the beginning of the year or something like that. So there are 6 to 10, even 12-month payment plans where families can divide what's due over the course. So that's a little bit of a more like able to bite sort of, so if you owe, $5,000, wait, I need to do something that I can round in. Anyway, you get the drift, right? If you owe $10,000, you can pay $1,000 a month for 10 months, and that sort of gets you to the point where you can stomach the $10,000 bill, right? So those are options. And then I would just finally say, and this would be something that we would probably talk more about in the fall, is there is an appeal process, right? So every award that we send is what we believe is the best award we can give, but there are oftentimes circumstances that make a difference, especially because, remember, you're giving me 2-year-old data. So today I got an appeal today while I was on the train from a family who went from making $190,000 to making $84,000 from 17 income to 18 income. That's a major difference, right? So they were able to document to me that their income has changed dramatically. They still have their expenses. They were able to show me how their expenses work out at the end of the month. And I was able to give pretty significantly more money. Now, if I had known that on the front end, I may have been able to give them the initial award with that 2018 information. I didn't know that their information had changed. So they reached out back and said, hey, this is a significant change. I'm like, yeah, you're right, it is. So I was able to then give more need-based financial aid because their circumstances had changed. Uh-huh. That's okay. Yeah, full ride. I hate that term. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So the question is, and this is really, it's because you guys talk as neighbors, and that's really frustrating to financial aid people. And because you want to be so proud of your kids, and I totally get it because I'm a fourth grader, and I think it's the smartest kid in the world. But so you talk and you say, oh, Johnny got a full ride scholarship. That is a lie, people. Like, people don't get full ride scholarships. Like, it's so rare for you to get a full ride scholarship. What that does mean, though, perhaps, is the family is very low income. And so their family contribution is zero. They cannot pay anything. So the school was able to meet their full need, right? So back in that scenario, if that $20,000 cost, there had been no family contribution, we would have still met that student's need with full aid. Doesn't mean full grant. We probably would have given them at least a work-study award. I believe most colleges give at least work-study, so gives that sort of self-help component. Some colleges don't give loans. Some colleges do give loans. That's kind of a variable that we have at the moment. But there are a few. I don't want to disparage you. There are probably, I don't know. You might have two a class maybe that get a full scholarship. Do you? I don't even know. Like I cannot recall the last time that I gave a full. I don't think I ever, honestly. I gave a full ride scholarship at Rhodes. I think we had something that covered tuition fees and books, but you still had to pay room and board, right? So I can't imagine a time in which now I give away $75,000 every day to really low-income families who can't afford to pay, right? So you could call that a full ride, but it's need-based financial aid. Does that make sense? Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. So there is another tool in addition to the net price calculator called the FAFSA forecaster. It gives you a sense of what your expected family contribution will be in a pretty quick and easy way. And that is going to be terrific. That is going to be a great sort of measurement for families who don't have, who are married to one another, everyone's living in the same household. Well, actually, so it's a custodial household, remember, because we're doing the FAFSA in this particular case. So it's going to give you a really good sense of what your federal expected family contribution is, which is going to determine any federal grants that you're eligible for, any work study, and any student loan. So that is a great sort of shopping tool. In addition, it's kind of maybe a little less commitment than the net price calculator. So it's one of those sort of variety of quick calculators. So it's the FAFSA forecaster. You can just Google that. It comes right up. It's a federal tool. Number of forecaster. Exactly. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Right. Right, yeah. Such a game, right? Right. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Hmm? Right. Yeah, so this is like the underbelly of the college admission world in my mind. So this is the underbelly, right? Like the kind that like grows the barnacles and stuff. You know what I'm talking about, like on a boat. This is part of marketing strategy for colleges, and they're trying to attract different populations of students from different regions of the country, right? So perhaps a reason why, I can't speak to how Amherst does this, and good knows Williams and Amherst are rivals, so I certainly wouldn't want to disparage them in any way, but what might be a presumption there is the University of Chicago may have it's called search. So may have searched your Cole. Is that what you said? Cole's. They may have met criteria. So in Chicago, they might really want men from New York City. They are probably really attracted to your test score. They might be really attracted to your zip code. Because if you think about the amount of information that you give on either a PSAT, I think those are SAT and ACT, those are the tools that most colleges use to search for names. And so how we build our databases, and I mean we, meaning colleges, build our databases, we don't wait for you to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm interested, right? We have some criteria that we tell these search companies that help us find you guys. We tell them we want people from this region who have scored in this range, who might be from these either regions of the country or maybe even specific zip codes. And we then buy your address from them. Yeah. Right. Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So that doesn't mean that Williams and Amherst are not interested in you. What that means is, so financial aid's part of it is zero. Yeah, financial aid's part of it is zero. I have never been a part of the only time I've ever been a part of a conversation, the only reason I know about this is because I'm on the leadership team of the enrollment division at institutions. So that is my role, as I am on the leadership team. But I never have looked at any data that has to do with who we buy or how we buy it. But I will tell you that the way that they got to the 37,000 is that you met criteria that they have put into a search firm's database to say if they have X on the ACT and their self-reported GPA is Y, then this is based on that. This is how much they're qualified for merit aid. It has nothing to do with need-based aid. They absolutely do not come to financial aid to get that. Yeah. No, it does not come from financial aid. But I think what you take away from that conversation really is that every school has a different targeted population, right? And every school is going to then use their limited dollars, everyone has limited dollars, to try to attract students. So you in New York City may not have ever known about Roanoke College unless you got that information and it's stuck in your head, whether that's going to drive you to apply or not. But you've just told however many people are online and here, Roanoke College. I can guarantee somebody's going to Google that tonight and be like, where the heck is that? And how can I get $37,000? So that's really what they want. University of Chicago probably really wants the New York City traffic, right? So they're going to drive. Williams and Amherst perhaps they're already getting that New York City traffic. So maybe we're searching in rural Minnesota. I don't know. I'm making that up. But, maybe we're sending that same sort of information. We aren't sending merit aid because Williams or Amherst doesn't do merit aid, but we might be sending, hey, do you know that we are very affordable? We have a fly-in program for you in October and blah, blah, blah. There are schools that are doing the gamut of that. So that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought it up. It's sort of a big picture question about the complicated factors that you guys are now getting in your inboxes and in your mailboxes for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, absolutely. There are, but most oftentimes they apply to tuition only. So the question, just so everyone can hear, is are there actually merit-based scholarships that are quote unquote full scholarships. Yes, there are. There are lots of colleges who say full scholarship, half scholarship, quarter, like you said that. So most oftentimes that is when you ask the clarifying question, it covers tuition only. So unless you're planning to commute and eat all your meals at home, you still will have out of pocket expenses. I am absolutely not trying to disparage folks who get full scholarships, and I'm thrilled for you that you actually have that. But what I want to make sure you understand is that the cost is much more than just the tuition dollar itself. And that's sort of typically where merit ends and need-based aid comes in, or that you have to pay out of pocket. Good. Uh-huh. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So for anybody who couldn't hear, free rides. Right. That's a good point. Right. Just for everybody who couldn't hear, the sort of quote unquote free rides often are associated with some sort of athletic talent in most cases. Right, exactly. So that's sort of the term, I think, just gets sort of thrown around a lot. Oftentimes, this is the time of year that you'll actually see, the Today Show will broadcast, several kids getting in tonight to Harvard or to Yale or, something like that. And they'll say, free ride, I got admitted to all colleges and all free rides. That means that they're very low income, which is terrific that colleges are able to do that, and that students have qualified for that, and students have worked so hard for that. But when they say free ride, remember, it's not a merit-based scholarship. It is really about the family's ability to pay and the college's ability to meet that family's need. Okay, so tip again, check with your tax preparer or your financial advisor, but apparently you can use 529 plans to pay for high school. Good to know. Boarding schools, is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you correctly. That's true. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So geographic diversity is part of that. When we were earlier talking about where students, like how students can get merit-based aid, that sometimes is geographic diversity is one of those factors. You're exactly right. So as I said earlier, I used to work in the South. To get a kid from New York City, we would, bend over backwards for that, right? Whereas where we are, we have thousands of kids from New York City in Western Massachusetts, and that doesn't mean that the student's not qualified for both institutions. It's the how to fill a class. It's all about sort of that art and science of making a class. Absolutely. Yes. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Hmm? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Right. Right. So the gentleman asked earlier, that's a great question, and I will not be a financial advisor for you, so I want to be very clear that is not my role. But as the gentleman said earlier, in asking about 529s, it is a reality that is a part of your asset portfolio. right? So that is right at this moment, if you haven't spent it down already, that is a part of your asset portfolio. When you apply to college a year or 2 years from now, that will remain a part of your asset portfolio unless it's no longer there. So if the best idea for your family and your situation is to spend that because you can now on high school expenses, great. What we might as an where we're thinking about need-based financial aid, we might see your income as relatively high, and we would be curious about why you didn't save anything. That might be a question, maybe in the appeal process, where you're saying, no, I need more money, and we might say, all right, well, tell us, why you have why you purchased a house in 2017. I'm making things up. Why you purchased a house in 2017 for $3 million and you have nothing saved for college. Help us understand your priorities for education as it relates to you're asking us for more money. Typically, that wouldn't be a first assessment. It would be more of but I don't think it would penalize you in any way if you wanted or needed to use your 529 here, if that is permitted. And I can't speak to if it is or isn't. Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it is, again, it's your asset. So the question is, does your 529 for both kids, so if you have multiple kids, does the 529 count as an asset even if you're saving for two kids? Yes, it does. The CSS profile will ask you the total value of your 529 and then how much for the student that's enrolling and then how much for other kids and how many kids does it basically does it go for. So we do a little bit of behind the scenes math there, but again, it is your asset, so it is going to be counted as an asset. I'm going to take her in the back and then I'll get to you. Immediately. So it's either at fafsa.ed.gov or studentloans.gov. G-O-V. Parent and or student. Mm-hmm. It is both. It's parent and student. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's directing you to the same site. You can just find it multiple ways. That's correct. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Okay. I wasn't sure if you were going to add something.
If you could just speak to who may not qualify for
mm-hmm.
are interested in these students.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So they may not qualify.
Absolutely. So I think you should know that even if you've done a quick calculator, the FAFSA forecaster or whatever, and you realize that your income exceeds what the college is going to be able to fund for you, that unsubsidized student loans, so interest rate where the interest rate is the same, but the subsidy is not provided by the government. So it's the same student loan, just with no interest subsidy. Any student can qualify for, no matter what your financial position is. You do have to do a FAFSA for that, but again, any student can qualify, and it's the $5,500 first year, $65,000 the second year, $75,000 3 and 4. So that, again, is a financing option for anyone, no matter what your income is. That's correct. And the college is going to tell you all of this information. Is sort of step-by-step process. And then the parent loan, again, regardless of your financial position, you have the ability to borrow a parent loan, as long as your credit is good, for cost of attendance minus aid. So both of those do require the FAFSA. So you want to do that, and then the applications, as the lady in the back was speaking about, the application for each will happen after you've been accepted to a college. You don't want to do an application for the loan before you're accepted to college, right? So for the loan pieces, you don't need to do an application before you're accepted to college. So that's that. And then work study, again, we've talked about a little bit the difference between federal work study and then just an on-campus job. You may qualify for federal work study, but not grant funding. So again, doing the FAFSA is a good option, especially in year one, just to sort of see what you qualify for. Even if you don't qualify for federal work study, there's something called campus employment that we've touched on as well that may require the FAFSA. So just the FAFSA is oftentimes an institution's way to sort of make sure that your son is has done selective service, that your citizenship status is in line, all of those sorts of things. So it's almost one of those catch things. If you're staying in New York State, some of the state programs require the FAFSA. So FAFSA is almost one of those things that you're going to want to do unless you're planning to write a check or do the 10-month payment plan. Like that's kind of the rule of thumb. And if you have any sort of financing needs, FAFSA is where you want to start with those financing needs. That's right. It's going to be part of your financial aid award once the student is admitted to the college. Great question. Yeah. That's a great question. I didn't even mention retirement. So everything that I've said about assets, your assets are your assets, that excludes retirement. Thank you for clarifying that. So we do, but it does get a little confusing because we ask for retirement information, and people are always really skeptical and like, you're lying. I know you're looking at my retirement, but I promise we don't. But the reason we asked for it, we started asking for it about 12 years ago now on the CSS profile, because what we have just come out with this academic year is sort of a guide for financial aid administrators to sort of help us understand families who are going to college, who have college-age children, where is their retirement sitting? Is it, and we have now begun to put some benchmarks in place to say, oh, they're behind in retirement. Oh, they're way ahead in retirement. And the only time that factors into a financial aid decision is when you're appealing. So the woman who was asking the question earlier about what if I just can't make it work? And so there's an appeal process, right? And we get about 100 appeals a year. So, we send out, probably, 900 awards, and we get about, about 90. So, you're thinking about 10% appeal. And that is when we start to look at your retirement. And so we sort of say, oh my gosh, this person is 59 and they have very little in retirement, and they have 2 kids that are going to college at the same time. Like, those sorts of things, that factors in when a family is saying to us, I just can't afford this. Rather than a 48-year-old who has 1 child who has saved 3 times the amount projected for a 48-year-old. We go, well, they clearly have chosen to supplement their retirement rather than save for college, right? So that is where the retirement conversation comes into play. Again, I can assure you that no financial aid office is counting your retirement against you or for you. In general terms, we're not saying 3% of your retirement should go to college savings. Nothing like that. We are not doing that, just to be clear. But what we are looking at is maybe your preparedness for retirement when it relates to your college affordability. Yes, sir. Yes. Your income is your income, so that doesn't really change. But what we do again on the appeal side of things is you might tell us, I have a fixed income, I'm getting this much a month, in retirement, and my expenses are about to go up, or my expenses are going down, or so that is when those conversations come up. But no, we don't have any sort of factor that says you're going to get a 2.5% raise every year, and then so we don't do any of that sort of projecting in any way. And in fact, with the CSS profile, because we're looking at 3 years of income, we're going to see that your income has been steady, it's been constant or fixed. And we're, and those expenses are most of the time going to increase year to year. That's correct. That's right. So as a junior Still got a little time, but I would assess where your 529 plans live. Again, about 94% of those nationally live in the parent's name with the student as a beneficiary. That's the best case scenario for you. If someone else has set up a 529 plan and it is solely in your student's name and the student is the beneficiary, that is your student's asset. And the difference between a student asset and a parent asset is most people are going to assess the student asset at 25% annually because they want to spend. They're expecting you to spend down your full saving or full asset by the time you finish college. The overall sort of philosophy of financial aid assumes that any expenses that students have, any assets that students have, will go towards college expenses. So we assess it at a 25% rate in order to spend that down. So the other question, though, is about if it is in your grandparent's name, right, and student is a beneficiary, you are supposed to report that. That is supposed to be, it is on the CSS profile as sort of, I think the term for it is savings in other people's names on your behalf or something like that. So so you are supposed to report that. I can tell you that I'm not sure how I would find that if you didn't, but people are really honest and they're supposed to be honest. And so we do see that sometimes. But again, nationally, about 94% of 529s are in the parent's name. So if you're sitting here going, I don't know where it is, chances are it's in the parent's name unless you have, a grandparent or, family friend who has been so generous to set something up for your student. It's up to you. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody good? Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So we don't actually, unless you're the only time we actually look at expenses are for international families who are living outside the U.S. And that is because as in the U.S., we don't quite have sort of the baseline expenses in other countries as we do here. We actually use the CPI data, so consumer index pricing sort of. So we actually assume that your income is going to stretch a certain amount. So we don't actually ask you for expenses like that. The only time that a college would ask you for your monthly expenses would be in an appeal process where you're saying my money's just not going far enough. But in the actual CSS profile and the actual FAFSA, we are not asking you for your monthly expenses. All right, I'm gonna make you cry. One of my favorite students who really had a tough time with financial aid and really is just a terrific student and is now a graduate with a really high-powered job here in the city. And, I worked really closely with his mom because that was really important for her to send him to college. And so you all, whatever position you're in right now, this is going to be you in 400 and some days? Maybe even less than that at this point. So think about that and think about this whole stressful process, and it's going to be so worth it because your sons are going to be elsewhere and they're going to be thriving and getting ready to go into this big, exciting world. So let me know if I can help. Again, you have terrific college counseling that I know will help, and I'm happy to meet with you individually up here if you have more personal questions. Make a friend in financial aid. Absolutely. That is a really, really important piece is you are, and I always tease my admission friends, the admission folks are your closest friends and your closest allies up until the point at which they enroll you in the college, and then they have to go recruit the next class, right? And so they're like, peace out, friends. And so we are the ones, the financial aid folks are the ones who have engaged you since March of your junior year all the way through graduation. We're going to be the ones standing on the sidelines cheering when your son gets that diploma, right? And so just make sure that you have that connection. Make sure that you have a great relationship, not an adversarial one, not one where when I see your number pop up on my phone, I'm like, oh my God. But I'm excited to talk to you, right? So make sure that is a really important connection that you make at the college that you choose.